time to start the meeting. Before I do anything else, can I just remind councillors and commissioners that the public section of this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the Patronage Regional Council website following the meeting and archived for a period of 3 years as noted on page 3 of the agenda. For those members of the public here today, all care will be taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded. By remaining in the public gallery, it is understood your consent is given if your image is inadvertently broadcast. I also remind all present that the local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers, and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. So, first of all, welcome to you all here. It's the first meeting that we've had the town and city commissioners, and I recognise you, Sylvan and Stephen, should I say, and Bill Wasley's in the back, preferring to sit out. I've invited David Love, who's not on this committee and will not be able to vote, to join us at the top table. And at the end of the table here, I welcome to our two submitters to the public forum, which I'll introduce when it comes around to them. Just a reminder, health and safety. There are toilets. Where are the toilets for the public? Out back door and on the right. If there's any emergency, earthquake, fire, whatever, if it's an earthquake, it's a drop, cover and hold, and it's a pretty well constructed building, I hope. But under the tables, if we're called on to evacuate, we go through the front of the building and meet across the road. That's for a fire or that sort of emergency. Thank you, and we'll move straight on. The next, I'm going to call for apologies. We've so far got, have you got any more than, we've got Mayor Gary Webber, Deputy Mayor Andrew Isles, and our leader, Doug Leader, our regional chair. Are there any further apologies?
I'm presuming Councillor Nees will be late, so could I offer their apologies?
Councillor Nees for lateness. Can I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Rose, seconded by, you're not a councillor, Mr. Thomas. Thank you. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Okay, the public forum. We've got Jessica Ireland and Louisa Wittenzyler. Close, maybe that's scar. You can introduce you if I've got your pronunciation wrong. You're going to be talking about having a later bus service, and I welcome you now. You have 5 minutes for your deliberate for your dissertation. Oh, can you, in front of you there's a microphone, if you can use, just. When you're ready.
Hi, I'm Jessica Ireland, and this is...
Just press it and leave it. It should be green.
Hello? Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm Jessica Ireland. This is Louisa Woodensalmer. We are 2 year 12 students from Mount College, and we're here today to talk about an extended busing hours in Tauranga City's buses. So basically, how this all started was we went to this informative day about drunk driving, safe driving, that kind of thing. And we basically heard this really tragic story about a guy who was in an accident, drunk driving. And we were trying to think of alternatives, like things that could really help with that for youth and basically everybody. And we kind of came to the conclusion that having a later bus service would really help with this kind of thing. So
alternative would be later buses on like weekends, preferably 24-hour bus service. The benefits would be more freedom for disabled, elderly, ill, and the youth. People off the roads, less traffic. Safer roads with fewer drunk drivers, less traffic, fewer collisions. Restaurants, bars, entertainment facilities have more customers because more people will be able to be out later. To keep young people off the road because it's safer at night.
Some evidence to back this up. Basically, there was a case in DC where that said 9% of drunk driving cases were reduced after the bus operating times changed to 3 a.m. The most frequent cases of drunk driving are between the ages of 18 and 24, which would a lot of the people taking the bus service, especially in the weekends. In Christchurch and Auckland, buses do go till midnight. And in Colorado, a group did a report on whether later buses reduce roadside accidents, and they found that having extended busing hours reduces roadside fatality by just 4%, but the roadside injuries by 15%. And in Melbourne, a study showed that although there were no significant reduction in accidents, their research showed that more people were at restaurants, bars, and in the city in general in the evenings when bus services went later. So yeah, thank you.
Are there any questions for clarification only? Councillor Branning.
So we are talking it right across the network. You're not talking about specific routes at the Mount.
Well, it doesn't have to be every single bus, but as many buses as possible would really help. And I mean, we could always like make the pricing go up if that helps with bus driver pay or anything like that for specific buses. Or yeah.
Thank you. Any further? Listen, thank you very much for your presentation. We can't make any decisions at this meeting, but the staff will take it away and have a look, and it'll come back through the minutes of the next meeting that we have. So thank you for your attendance and good luck.
Thank you.
Before I move on, I forgot to welcome a warm welcome to Raywin Brunel. Now she's the first union bus for bus drivers, and we're based in Rotorua. Thank you for coming through, Raywin. Okay, we move on. So we move on now to. Tell me what I can remember. Oh, yeah, so here we go. Sorry, let's do this. Are there any items that are not on the agenda that anybody wants to add? There's been none. The order of business, it's the same as in the agenda. Any declaration of conflicts of interest? There's been none. We move on to the minutes. The minutes of the last meeting are on page 7.
Happy to move, Chairman.
Move. Councillor Thurston.
You're not having a good day today,
No, I
Chairman.
know I'm not.
No.
It's been a busy week.
Happy to second.
Who was that? Councillor Brunning. Moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Are there any matters that you want to raise out of the minutes? There being none, we move on. The chairman's report, let me just go to what page we are.
16.
Thank you. This report will be presented by Jessica Easter. Hi, Jess. I'll hand over straight to you.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors and commissioner. So we are at page 16 of your agenda, the chairperson's report. The first item there is in relation to the Walker Kotahi funding. So you'll recall that we have had funding to cover COVID-related costs. So those include things like the extra cleaning required of buses, hand sanitizer for our passengers, and we've also been able to receive funding for fare revenue foregone. We have received notice that funding will continue until 30 June 2021, but a very strong indication has been given to all councils that it will cease at that point in time, and that councils need to start preparing to fund those losses themselves. So staff are currently just pulling together the figures for what we expect that will look like. Obviously, it's a very difficult thing to do, given we're constantly moving through various alert levels. So hopefully we'll have more information at our next committee meeting around what those costs will look like. I will skip over the decarbonisation of the public transport bus fleets. We do have a more detailed paper later on in the agenda on that point. The Western Bay of Plenty Community Panel. So this has now been established, and there is a list there of the members that have been appointed. We still are looking for Māori representation on that panel, and so we are actively working to find someone another person to sit on that panel. The first meeting will be on the 23rd of March, and it will be held here. We've got a few just dot points there around patronage updates. So we have continued to see an overall decline across the region, which is consistent with what is happening around the entire country. The decline in both Whakatane and Rotorua are much more significant than what we're seeing here in Tauranga, so that's up around 30%. The Tauranga network, when you're looking at both urban and school networks, we've actually seen an increase of 5.4%, and that is driven by the increases that we continue to see on the school networks. So when we look at the urban network alone, there has been a decrease, but yeah, the whole network combined, we have that 5.4% increase, which is quite rare across the country at the moment. You'll see there, we just under the school services heading, that we've noted that there was an 88.5% increase on that Q2 prior year, and based on some of the numbers that we're pulling together from this year, we're still seeing an increase. So we have first few weeks of schools returning, we had another 10% increase on what we did at the start of last year. So the popularity continues to increase, and yeah, we've had to put an additional 3 buses on to address that increase. The next point that we've noted in the chairperson's report relates to the safety and security at bus interchanges. You'll recall that from the 28th of December, we, and that being Bay Plenty Regional Council, put security down at Willow Street and in Brereton at those bus interchanges. We didn't put any security down at Farm Street, as over the summer break, police had increased presence down there, and Bayfair Shopping Centre also had increased security, so that wasn't required. That has since been withdrawn. So we're now looking at whether we want to put additional security in Farm Street to support our bus drivers and passengers who are waiting there for the buses. Overall, it's been a really successful initiative. We've received an enormous amount of positive feedback from drivers, passengers, particularly the elderly, and from businesses around the area. The security dealt with over 800 incidents in the first, I think that was the first 2 months, I haven't noted what it was, the first 2 months, I believe. And then we've seen a decrease of 30% since the commencement of security being in place at those locations. We're working quite closely with police around these issues, and the police are really pleased with what they're seeing, and they've commented that given the number of incidents we're seeing, the fact that that hasn't resulted in more significant incidents is an indication that it's working and that it's a valuable resource for our community. The cost is approximately $600,000 per annum, and we have not budgeted, as you know, we haven't budgeted. This is something that we've done as a reaction to the incidents that were occurring last year. And we're continuing to work with Waka Kotahi and Tauranga City Council to obtain support for this initiative so that it can remain in place for the longer term.
Yes, I'll take Councillor Lees first and then Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. It's great to see the community panel up and running. I've just got a question on how our rural bus users are represented on this panel, because I can see only one that has a rural background, but you know, there may be others that I don't know, but our bus users aren't just our urban users. This is a Western Bay group, and if we haven't got a representation which represents the rural users that have a different need, I wonder if that's something we could think about. That's question one, so I'll let you answer that one.
Good observation, Councillor Lees. Yes, I think I'm talking to Councillor Von Delson, there are some gaps on the panel, so we're actively looking for a number of people, so we'll add a rural bus user to the list.
Great, thank you. The other issue, and we'll be talking about it more when we get to the fare paper, but I would really like to know how much of the increase in our school service is driven by the zero fees. We've got a paper that is discouraging, to say the least, with regard to dropping the fares. I think it would be quite timely to actually run a targeted survey of the school service to say, would you still use the bus if you had to pay? Because we are, I think we're really up against it, to be quite frank, in increasing our bus patronage. Despite our many efforts, we are still getting a decline in some areas, and we're hearing that in Tauranga, the increase is driven by the free buses, the school student buses. So I think we really need to understand that before we actually go into the discussion around free fares. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Has any consideration been given to leasing some space in the CBD where we could in fact provide an indoor area, a lovely, you know, customer-friendly indoor area that our bus users could use instead of having to sit out on the streets?
I think that probably fits into some of the broader conversations that we are having around infrastructure for the region and what our bus interchanges should look like. So I would say broadly, yes, that is something that is being considered, but probably not as a short-term option at this point in time.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Look, just around the security issues that you've been having at here in Tauranga, have you seen any issues also in Rotorua? And I'm aware in Rotorua we have the city guardians who, you know, who are proactive in this area. But has there been an increase in issues being reported around bus patronage in Rotorua as well, like in a similar vein?
We certainly didn't have the same number and spike in incidents in Rotorua, but certainly post-lockdown there were things happening around the central Rotorua area, and so we are working quite closely with the operators in both Rotorua and Whakatane to make sure that if things are escalating, that we're ready to address those as well. During lockdown last year in particular, we did put additional security in place to support the wardens. And we, of course, will do the same again if we do see an increase.
Thank you. Yes, Rotorua is seeing quite a bit of these issues, not just on the bus service. So Rotorua Council is actually putting quite a bit of backing in behind financing security and safety for bus patrons and just people using the inner city. So I think it's a multiple city problem.
Rose?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I've got a couple of questions. One is in regards to the Western Bay of Plenty Community Panel. How was the youth representative selected? Because I know that Paul Poe is a staff member for TCC. So why is it not an actual young person?
Excellent question again. Yeah, we're very aware of that. He's a sort of a holding pattern in terms of until we find an actual young person to be on the panel.
But I mean, like, we've got two ladies here who I suspect catch the bus. So it's a matter of, like, are we willing to get out there and actually ask? Because there are lots of them out there. My second question is in regards to safety and security. So what is the deadline for security at the moment? Because I know it got extended, but what's the current deadline?
We don't really have a deadline on it. We assess it on a weekly basis and we make tweaks based on the way that the incidents and I guess the issues that are arising are moving around the place. So it's constantly being reviewed. But I guess ultimately it will come down to a funding issue and how long we're willing to fund that for.
Yeah, and so I'm just reading the last paragraph of the safety and security paragraphs, and I'm just saying that you wish to seek an extension of presence of Bayfair on Farm Street, and then you've got comma Mount Maunganui. So is that just stating where Bayfair is, or is that including the Mount?
No, sorry, that is just Farm Street in Mount Maunganui, yes, where the bus stops are.
So would we consider potentially looking at either Papamoa or Mount CBD as well, or no?
At this stage, no, because we're not experiencing any incidents around those areas. So we're really focusing on the areas where there has been that dramatic spike that we saw last year. Obviously, if we do see issues arise in those other areas, then it's certainly something we'd consider.
Commissioner Shaw. Thank you, Chairman. I think the item that I want to raise is really relevant to items 7.1 through 7.4, but it comes up in respect of the work program for the committee over the next wee while. Tauranga City is very keen to see that there is very strong alignment between the regional land transport plan review, the business case that subsequently may derive from that, and then the reviews and optimisations of some of the corridors. And we see all of those, and they are noted in the report subsequently that they are all interdependent. But what I would ask is that the officers give serious consideration to those dependencies to make sure that those various projects work in sync and we have a clear understanding of kind of what's in the terms of reference for each piece of work and then how they respond to one another, because otherwise we have a risk of kind of going off in various directions and then not talking to one another. So it's really just a more overarching, and ideally in terms of our program, it would be great to have some recommendations coming back to the next meeting as to how that looks.
Thank you. That will be discussed in more detail in the next section. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, so just a lovely segue. Thank you, Commissioner. There are two related items I think we need to get our heads around. The first is that there was an independent audit done of Ufti, and there were some significant recommendations that came out of that, and there's some work going on, as I understand it, about how we can actually achieve far greater integration. So I would like to see in this meeting an update given to us in terms of where that work is actually at. The second issue is that I note that there is, in relation to the Western Bay of Plenty sub-region, really no mention of the transport system plan. which has, as I understand, an independent governance body. Again, I'd like to know who is that, to whom are they accountable, and what actually is their role, and how does that work in terms of what I've just mentioned as my first point. So again, we've got some big joining of dots to do, and I'd like a discussion on those matters in the course of this meeting, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Again, thank you for noting that. It will come up. I think we'll get an answer in this, and we'll pose that in the next section. Anyone else? So I've just got a couple of things. The security angle, the 600,000 a year. Can I and welcome Cole O'Keefe, who's NZTA representative here today. Can I ask you first, Jess, and then to comment on the work that's been going on to try and get a more even funding? It's not historically that's part of bus infrastructure, I think, and there has been work between the city and the NZTA. Can you tell us, is there any progress on funding cooperation between the three entities? And then we'll ask Cole and so on. I'd like to do a comment.
Yes, I can provide an update. So we are actively discussing the funding with both Waka Kotahi and TCC. There are, with each of the councils, there are different activity classes that things can be claimed under, and usually security around bus interchanges is claimed by the TLAs in one of their activity classes. Staff are cooperating, and they are actively trying to push that through to get that funding from both NZTA and TCC. And then we're also having separate conversations with Waka Kotahi to see if there is another way that we can obtain funding under one of our activity classes for those services, security services. So at this point in time, no other parties are contributing, but the conversations are most definitely open, and everyone is still cooperating and trying to find a way to share the cost and share the load of these services.
Do you want to comment at all?
You through, Chair. No, yeah, through you, Chair. Not a lot to add, but yeah, just to note that we're having discussions with partners at the moment, activities applicable in terms of our investment policies and rules. So yeah, active conversation at the moment just to understand how we can provide some funding support.
Thank you. Just if we've got someone else, Commissioner.
Yeah, likewise, I can confirm that conversations are going on. But clearly the key challenge is this an or the key question in my mind as a commissioner would be, is this an operational expense or is it an infrastructure expense, and how does it fit in terms of the council's priorities? And I don't have a clear sense of that at the moment. I guess my gut reaction is that it's more an operational expense, but I've been open to being persuaded otherwise. So we've yet to get a full briefing from staff on the matter, but that's the way we're currently.
Thank you. Can I, just with regard to the Western Bay Community Panel, Councillor Rose, you're asking, I've made the request to Ruth this morning that we actually ensure that we have more bus users who are actually riding the buses. On that panel, the panel looks to be stacked with activists who represent sectors, and there doesn't look enough of bus users there, and your youth idea as well. So I personally will champion keep an eye on that panel and make sure that it's relevant. I think that's no further questions on this report. I'll move the report, and Councillor Rhodes is seconding it. All in favour, please say aye. It's carried. We move on to strategic direction, page 20 in your report, and this has been James Llewellyn, I hardly recognise you in a suit, James. You look pretty swish. And is Jessica joining you at the top table? Come on, Jess. Back them up.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we start this is a high-level strategic thinking paper, and we were going forward with that, and it's important for us as governors to actually keep our thinking at the high level rather than the operational day-to-day management of the bus service. So welcome, James. Thank you.
Thank you, and a very good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here, and I'm very excited to be undertaking this presentation to set out the work programme for the Public Transport Committee for this calendar year. And I would particularly like to draw your attention to the table on page 30 of your agenda paper, which actually summarises the work programme. And at the end of this presentation, I'll be happy to go through any questions on that or any other observations. But I thought it would be a good idea to just take a step back and remind ourselves of the strategic picture that Councillor Von Dazzleton quite rightly wants us to focus on in these kinds of discussions. And fundamentally, it comes down to integrating urban and public transport planning rather than having those as separate disciplines. So this slide tries to set out what integration actually looks like. So from the urban planning perspective, some of the things that collectively the partners in this part of the world are looking to aim for are things like dense and human scale communities as opposed to urban sprawl, which is very car-centric. And having connected centres and communities, which was a bit part of the UFD vision, and ensuring that people are able to get to where they need to get to within that urban setting. And it is all about understanding how people use the space. They use it to live, to work, to play and to learn. So we're very much focusing on people as opposed to simply infrastructure or vehicles, important though those are. In terms of public transport services, we have some really key priorities, for example, around behaviour change and mode shift. This is a theme we'll be talking about constantly throughout today in terms of the need to get significant mode shift, particularly to address the issues of climate change. The cost and the fares and the services is something that we will be addressing, but it isn't just about that, it's also about the cost of alternative modes as well, particularly the private car. In terms also of the public transport services, we need a product for people that is reliable, that they can plan their lives around and they can have confidence that it delivers what they need every day without exception. So having a good level of frequency and choice of buses and good route design. And in a later paper, we'll be talking about some of those principles in relation to the optimisation work that we'll be undertaking starting now. And also comfort and safety. So very important that the quality of the public transport product is comparable to what you might get in a private mode, and that it is absolutely safe and secure for people to use. We've seen a lot of headlines from the UK recently about the issues in London around concerns, particularly for female population, around the safety and security of being able to get out onto the streets and use public transport. It's a really serious issue and something we need to take to our heart in everything we do. In terms of public transport infrastructure then, the key priorities are getting bus priority in order to secure efficient, fast and reliable services. Unlike private vehicles, the buses can't easily change routes, so they get stuck in traffic and they can't avoid it. So having excellent continuous bus priority, as you see, for example, down Hewlett's Road, is what we need to see across the city, particularly on Cameron Road, which is our key public transport spine. The stops and interchanges we'll talk about a lot today. I've got another slide on it in a minute, but they are the shop window of the public transport system. If they look good and they function well for customer need, that's a really great start to the public transport journey. But if they don't, then the public transport experience is not optimal. And also it's really important that we've got to recognise that getting to the stop itself, or getting from the stop to your destination, is really important. So having that good pedestrian and cyclist accessibility. And one of the things that I think we do collectively need to raise our game around is understanding the needs of people with mobility impairments and planning our services and infrastructure around there. Finally, we have then transport system and infrastructure, and very much this is about moving people, not vehicles. The big advantage of the bus, if it's well used, is that it can move a lot more people per unit of road space compared to any other mode. So getting more people onto buses is good for everyone, including people who continue to drive a car. This effectively gives them more space and also gives freight services a lot more space as well. Accessibility to jobs and services is really quite critical. Understanding when people need to get to somewhere and where, and not just jobs, but also the services that people rely on as part of their everyday journey. And as I mentioned earlier, managing the parking, supply and charging is crucial if we're looking at a mode shift. If people have a space that's free and available every day, and they have a car, the chances are they will drive. And we need to change that. And it's then all about multimodal transport planning, public transport, walking and cycling. How do all those modes ultimately fit together? So that's our vision. We have this map, which unfortunately hasn't quite come out very well on the screen, but in essence, what we've got at the top there, you'll see that in terms of our public transport planning activity in 2021, we have 3 very important region-wide projects, and there'll be papers on 2 of those today. So that's the Regional Public Transport Plan Review and also bus fleet decarbonisation. So I won't say too much about those. But travel demand management behaviour change is going to be a really important element of work throughout 2021, and indeed it needs to become business as usual. So everything that we do has to be through that travel demand management and behaviour change lens. And behaviour change doesn't just mean mode shift, although that is really important, but it might mean actually decisions not to travel at all, more home working, for example, which is the ultimate way of saving carbon emissions. So we're very much about understanding people's behaviour and how we can persuade them to change it. That programme will be subject to a presentation at our next PTC at the end of May. In terms then of the map, we have specific projects in the 3 major sub-regions of the Bay of Plenty. So in Tauranga, Western Bay, we have the optimisation project, which I'll talk about in a later presentation, and also the public transport services and infrastructure business case. And this is a project that's a good example of joint working. So we're working very closely with both Tauranga City and Waka Kotahi to get that business case scoped and prepared for production starting later this year. In the Eastern Bay, we'll be considering a review of public transport services in that area. And we also have improved services between Kara and Whakatane coming in the middle of this year. So there'll be quite a lot of activity around understanding what's happening in that part of the world. And then last and by no means least, Rotorua, where we have significant concerns about the decline in patronage over quite a number of years now. And there is a need, following the current public consultation on the options for the future of that network, about what work we do in the short term to better optimise what we currently have versus the medium to longer term picture in terms of extra services and what the community is prepared to buy through any rate increases. So that just provides hopefully a good visual picture on plan about where our priorities lie in 2021. So I mentioned as well our public transport vision. I'm going to talk more about interchanges in a subsequent presentation, but the interchange is a shop window, as I said, and a good interchange and has a good number of features in it that passengers and others need to actually see. I'm not going to go through all of these, but one of them for me is about town centre integration. So if you have a public transport interchange, the most effective locations are where it's really well integrated with all of the land uses in a particular centre. So it's very convenient for passengers to get from the bus into the centre. And unfortunately, we have a couple of examples where perhaps at the moment the integration isn't as good as we'd ideally like it. And that's something that we should be looking to work across as we move forward into this year. Also understanding some of the key things that we can be improving, such as journey information, which we know we can actually do a lot more with, both in digital and in printed form. And also the quality of the waiting areas. I mean, whilst no passenger likes to wait more than is strictly necessary, it is a fact of life, and having a comfortable, clean, safe, well-lit, well-sheltered waiting area is absolutely crucial for the public transport product. So we have a whole range in that circle of items that when we're looking at interchanges and to a lesser extent bus stops, we need to be very mindful of what it is we want to actually achieve and give in terms of our product for customers. Public transport vision also comes down to understanding the integration between all modes, and that doesn't just mean buses. I think this is a really crucial point. So this slide sets out in very broad terms the concept of mobility as a service. And essentially what that aims to do is to provide the customer with a fully integrated, technology-enabled, one-stop shop for getting both information on a wide range of transport services and also enabling payment for those services. So mobility as a service is something that's been trialled in a few locations, and whilst we have elements of this service across New Zealand and indeed in the Western Bay, we don't have a fully integrated platform of this nature at the moment. And one of the things I think we need to explore this year is the extent to which we want to move towards this kind of model where we actually provide information in one location as opposed to a wide variety of locations that we currently have. So in terms of key items for today, in a minute I will briefly talk through the accessibility, the free fares for mobility impaired people. And then we'll also have more detailed discussions around the optimisation project and also bus fleet decarbonisation. So in terms then of the free fares, you will have seen hopefully from some of the press coverage in Rotorua that the Regional Council is going to implement a free fare concession for people with permanent mobility impairments, and that means that they are permanently unable to drive a private vehicle. That impairment isn't just physical, but it could be intellectual, psychological, sensory, or neurological. So we're extending the definition of mobility impairment much further than perhaps traditionally would have been the case, which is only a good thing. Because as I said earlier, what we need to do is just understand all of the needs of our communities and make sure that those are catered for. What it will mean is that existing members of the Total Mobility Scheme will automatically be eligible for the concession. So we're aiming to provide free travel 24/7 on all BOP RC bus services, and that's region-wide. So there is no postcode lottery in this one. Wherever you live, you'll get the same service. In terms of implementation, so we are ready for our 1st of July rollout. The public transport operations team are working very hard and diligently to get all the steps in place to make it happen. In terms of things we still need to work on, it's a question of just being very clear about our eligibility criteria and developing an application form that people can either fill in on paper or online, and then essentially we'll process those applications and issue the pass where the criteria are met. And it's really important on that score that we actually work with the disability groups to actually identify those eligible customers and begin the application process. We want to make this as seamless and easy and hassle-free as we possibly can. So that's something that we're really keen to make sure we actually do, and it doesn't become a bureaucratic nightmare for people. So that's the end of the presentation on strategic direction. Happy to take any questions and comments on either the presentation or indeed items in the paper itself.
So questions, Councillor Thompson first, followed by Councillor First.
Thank you, James, for the presentation. You would have heard my earlier comments in relation to where are we up to with looking at the recommendations that came out of the independent review of WFTI, particularly in terms of moving towards far more integrated operations between planning and delivery. And also my comment or my question around who is the governance board of TSP, what's their role, to whom are they accountable, and why do they not sit around the table? Those are starters.
Thanks, sir. I think I'd like to start by providing some reassurance that at the level that I operate, which is with my fellow technical officers at the City Council, we are really fully committed and are actively working together, irrespective of what goes on at the governance level. We know we need each other to be able to deliver what we want in terms of our specific responsibilities. So a very good example is the work that we're doing around the public transport services and infrastructure business case, because we both have a huge role to play in that, and we recognise the need to work together and establish how we're going to deliver that business case and indeed the projects that come out of it. So we're having meetings on a fortnightly basis where we go through all of our projects and ensure that we are actually talking to each other and ensuring that the work we do is reviewed by the other side. So a good example the other day, another business case is coming up for improvements in Otamotai and Rotorua, and TCC officers invited myself and a colleague to that meeting right at the start of the project, point of entry stage, before we've even actually got to doing any work. And that's exactly what we need to be doing, working from the start, so that we all have the same understanding. We're also having very good discussions on Cameron Road, because that's a live project. That's actually going to be built. We're having very constructive discussions on things like travel demand management and behaviour change. So at that level, I'm absolutely confident that we're working together. I think the question about the wider governance level is something that I would be happy to leave to Namuta, because that's where she sits. And as if by magic, Namuta has appeared to help me answer that question.
So through the chairs, the two things in relation to TSP governance, as well as the independent peer review, which had two key recommendations that came from Dave Brash, which looked at both funding and financing, as well as overall governance of urban and transport spaces. So I'll start with UFTI. So there was a recommendation and direction to staff at the last Smart Growth Leadership Group, which directed us to undertake a stock take, which is being led out by Dean Kimpton, on the priority development areas and the systems that connect between them and across them. So that work is currently underway and will be reported back to SLG at the next meeting. In terms of the governance of TSP, so obviously there's I guess twofold governance levels structure. So there's the group which James talked about, which are essentially the managers and the general managers of respective organisations which contribute into TSP. So obviously you have ourselves, you have TCC, the Port of Tauranga in there, Tangata Whenua representation, Kiwi Rail, reps and others. And then you also have the group above them, which is called a governance group, which is essentially your CEOs of respective organisations on that. So those are the two key structures that we are involved in.
Thank you. We move on to Stuart. Yeah.
Look, I'm keen to sort of contribute to this debate because it kind of sets the scene for the discussion the commissioners have had so far, and a very clear desire to make sure that the work of Tauranga City Council and the region are hand in glove in terms of the promotion of public transport services. And I can confirm, certainly the reports that I've had from TCC staff, that the relationship with BOP, regional council staff, and wider stakeholders has been ongoing and consistent. But I do think there is a need at some stage for us to have at a governance level, a kind of a high level discussion about actually how can we give real life to a partnership between both bodies to really run a aggressive agenda on this. Key to that, and hence my interest in the strategic review kind of content. And I'm aware that there's now fantastic data coming through from the B card in terms of patronage by route, by time of day. And certainly from the Commissioner's point of view, we're really keen to get an understanding of that because it sort of sets the context for that review process to make sure that we can really drive both better services and value for money. So you will hear me consistently kind of ask questions about that, and please excuse my ignorance because I am coming, from a completely blank page, but in some ways that may help ask some of those questions that are valuable for that wider strategic concept. So I appreciate Councillor Thompson's questions, and I think they drive at the need for greater collaboration between our organisations at a governance level and how we can make sure that we're hand in glove at delivery.
Mr. Chairman, I hadn't quite finished.
No, that's okay. I gave a discretion there to the Commissioner just once to butt in, but if you do want a question, you are an equal member in this committee, so please raise your hand, I'll take note and put you in order, but continue.
Yes, no, thank you, and I do want to thank you, Nanuta and James, for that response. We talk a lot about driving behaviour change, and I accept that, but I believe what we're facing here in the Western Bay is far beyond just that. We're trying to change the culture of a city that is the most car dependent in the Southern Hemisphere, a city that is absolutely unique in terms of the number of people who have discretion to go and do what they want to do in their leisure time. And so I think we need at some stage, for all of you who've been involved in trying to change cultures of organisations, you'll know it is no easy task. And what really concerns me most is that we're trying to change the culture of the city. We have to have the people on the journey. You put up our vision. Whose vision? It has to be the community's vision. And I've said this before and I will say it again. There has been to date no engagement with our communities on a general level around the implications of UFTI or TSP. So I'm hoping that the LTPs will do that. But let's not kid ourselves that this is going to be easy. And my read of the LTPs is that a lot of funding will go into business case preparation, but that will not be, we won't see much actually happen in terms of congestion levels, etc., for at least 3 to 5 years, in my opinion. There'll be some. So all I want to simply say is let's not kid ourselves that this is going to be easy. It's going to be a very, very difficult process, but one we have to have in true partnership with our communities of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Thiesman.
Thank you, Chairman. Look, I totally agree with everything that Councillor Thompson said, but can I just take us back to the issue of rolling out free travel region-wide for people with profound disabilities from the 1st of July. And I'd just like to once again commend staff and colleagues. I'm coming to you in stereo, I think, here, am I not? Or,
No, wait.
turn yours off, Chair. I'm in full flight here. But I just want to once again just commend staff and colleagues for their support of rolling out free public transport for people with disabilities, because anyone who's studied anthropology knows that a community is gauged on how it cares and looks after its people with disabilities. But to you and James and Namuta, I think, personally, I think the concept and the template that's been rolled out in the Waikato by Regional Council there is superb. And I think it's been highly successful and very well received. But I do think you may need to consider having photo ID on some of these, but seeing Raywin in the back of the room there, don't let any of us underestimate the value of bus drivers in this whole equation, because these people build meaningful relationships with the bus drivers and, in fact, friendships. So the drivers get to look after them, care for them and nurture them and help them in any way possible. But I also personally believe that these people should be registered with an acknowledged NGO, like the Disabled Persons Assembly or the IHC or Disability Action, CCS Disability Action, and the Foundation for the Blind. So, and the other thing is, I think you do seriously need to look at factoring in carers for some of these folk, because it is a major challenge for some of these, particularly those with intellectual disabilities, to venture out into the wide world on their own. So they need carers to support them initially, maybe not long term. So full marks, sincere thanks on behalf of the disability sector. Well done. But as they say in the sector, nothing about us without us. So talk to them, they will have the solutions, and I know they're throwing massive bouquets your way as I speak. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. That's really great to hear, and really appreciate all your support and direction. It's been really crucial in getting this initiative over the line. So yeah, really appreciate your comments on behalf of all the staff, and also very, very happy to acknowledge the role of bus drivers. It's a very, very difficult job, and the more I'm hearing about the bus drivers, the more I'm appreciating what a good crop of people we've actually got down here. I compare it to the situation in another city not too far from here, and it's certainly a lot better. The drivers here, I think, are really, really good.
Well said.
Thank you, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, here we go. Look, James, I love hearing you speak about these sort of things. You've just got that real knowledge in this space. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions in regards to making the current regional tertiary education free fare trial permanent. So currently, I don't know, Councillor Thurston might be able to answer this as well. I don't know if we're getting funding from the University of Waikato or Toiopomai in regards to the free fares currently. But if so, if we were to make it permanent, are there discussions with the university as well as Toiopomai in regards to them continuing that funding on?
Yes, I can answer that one. So we are working in collaboration with the University of Waikato and Toiopomai, and it is a jointly funded initiative. Council has approved for that trial to run to the end of this year, calendar year, and then we will review whether we want to continue that as a permanent service. But certainly we do have the full support of the Uni of Waikato and Toiopomai for that.
Sweet. Pretty much the reason I bring that up is because I just wanted to say in this committee that the change that we're talking about is something that not only needs to change the culture of a city, but it's also intergenerational. And so that's why these questions that we've got for our LTP are really good. Because the thing is if you get the younger generations used to getting on the bus and all, you can actually train that next generation that, hey, we don't need a car, we can just jump on a bus. Or no, we could jump on a bike or a line scooter if that's how you want to get around. But the thing is that we need to think about this from an intergenerational point of view as well as a culture point of view, because we cannot leave the community behind, but also we've got to recognise that young people have a very big opportunity here to make a real impact on this, on our bus services, but also on the future of the city as well. We're getting trained now. In the future, they won't need a car. I also just wanted to mention carers as well, and I want to thank Councillor Thurston for the amount of work that he's done in this space and the pressure he's put on to actually get these free fares for our disabled community. I just wanted to ask, is there any discussions in regards to giving carers that free travel? Because I know that Waikato has done that, but I don't know the exact extent as to what they've done. But have we looked into that? And if so, when could we potentially see something like that be implemented?
I know that we have looked at the potential to include carers in the free fare, and I now know that Waikato, after a period of time, did undertake that policy, but I think when they started it was just the mobility impaired people themselves. It's certainly something that we are looking to consider once we've got the scheme up and running, and in particular to understand who are the people and groups who absolutely need those carers to be with them, otherwise they wouldn't be able to use the service at all. So there's no point in offering something if we actually then don't make it usable. So I think what we're looking to do is introduce the project, observe how it goes, engage with the communities, and if there is a clear and pressing need to change the policy to include some or all carers depending on the type of mobility impairment, then we can certainly look at that, because I think we've got to recognise that we've got to be agile, we've got to understand how things go, and we might think we know it's going to work brilliantly until we actually get into it. We won't really know for certain. So having that constant dialogue is going to be really important. So it's something we certainly haven't ruled out.
Check, before we move on, and just to alert you, we will do morning tea after this item. Staff might be able to answer. We have run free trials for tertiary before, and they were very successful when they operated. As soon as they were taken, the funding stopped by the Polytech in Rotorua, and the patronage just dropped straight away. So it's all that, when something's free, you don't always get a good appreciation of the merit for use. And it's great to be free, but somebody has to pay. And does NZTA have a view on these free services? Cole.
Through your chair, within the agenda is some guidelines from Waikato around free fares, and it does mention some of the disbenefits of providing free fares. Generally, across the country, our guidance is to not support investment towards free fares, and the reasons for that are outlined within the paper.
Thank you. We move on to Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam. Sorry, we have female chairs quite a lot in Rotorua. Mr. Chair, thank you very much. And through you, look, I've just got a couple of comments and a couple of questions. The first one comes from your presentation, and when you're talking about the disability service, which I thoroughly applaud you for as well. You had a great picture there of a disability-friendly bus. Are all our buses that easy to access? Because I know in Rotorua, quite a few of the comments I've had back from that community is about the difficulty of actually physically getting on or off a bus. So if we don't have a complete fleet of disability-friendly buses, now we're having all this extra data coming through and we've got the real-time data coming off where the buses are. Is there a way of being able to inform these patrons of when a disability-friendly bus might be coming along, so they know not to go out for the next bus, but to wait for the one after? So that's my first question.
All buses in urban areas are subject to the RUB standards, the requirements for urban buses, which is set by Waka Kotahi. And that does require all the buses to be accessible for people with disabilities. It requires 2 wheelchair spaces and a number of other considerations. Waka Kotahi are currently reviewing their RUB standards, and a lot of that is around accessibility, because there is feedback from some people that actually it might not be as good as it can be. So we certainly have submitted on that review, and I expect probably a number of other people around the country and organisations will have too. So it may be that in future we do see some improvements to the requirements for urban buses across the country.
And thank you for that. Look, my second one is really just a comment, and it is around that investment policy of Waka Kotahi in relation to co-funding negative fare reviews, so free fares and stuff. And I do notice in a later report there is a mention that that is being reviewed by NZTA, overdue, I think. I think that the world has moved on a long way since 2010, and actually those policies are really out of step with what regional and TLA councils are being required to do in terms of looking at the 4 well-beings as well as just a pure transport mode. And I was horrified to see in here that one of the reasons cited for not supporting free fares was ridership growth can create pressure on public transport capacity, resulting in a call for even more capacity to be provided. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're trying to increase patronage on the buses to reduce private car usage. So, please get on with that review, I think is all I can say there. One other thing was, and I'm sorry, I might have been better to ask this when we were doing matters arising out of the minutes. At our last meeting, we'd asked for data back on if we had any information on the use of bike racks on the buses in Rotorua. So I just hope that I didn't see it anywhere in this agenda. So I just do hope that comes back to us at some stage. And finally, I'm really looking forward to seeing the reports this year on the results of the public transport review in Rotorua. And I thanked regional council and when they came and visited Rotorua last week. But thank you so much to all of you for bringing forward this review. It's really vital for Rotorua, and we really appreciate that it has been brought forward.
No.
Well, just through the chair, towards the end of last year, we sent out a newsletter with some bike rack information and details. So we'll make sure we'll resend that, because there might have been an issue with the circulation system.
Can I just add to that? We have actually updated the reporting in our Aotaki report, so I can take you to that later on, but we now include the statistics for other regions too.
Thank you. Councillor Needs.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas took the words out of my mouth with regard to Waka Kotahi's approach with regard to peers. I think we're all grappling with massive change, policy change coming through with regard to climate change, with regard to the GPS, and I just want to acknowledge that Waka Kotahi's doing a lot of work in updating their processes and systems, and it's quite difficult sometimes for us to actually assimilate that and respond in the right timeframe. But I think this is an area where if we are truly to meet the targets that are being set for us, we are going to need some more enabling change coming through from Waka Kotahi. We've already had that discussion over the ability to go to smaller buses so that we can decarbonise our fleet more easily. I think this issue around fares, and I'm not necessarily an advocate for free fares for everything, but it needs to be at a level where people feel incentivised to leave their car behind. So I'm recognising the partnership we've got with Waka Kotahi, but I do hope that we have the ability to submit on the different pieces of policy that you're working on, particularly with regards to fares. And if I can give you a little example, we've been frustrated that the processes that we have to go through are quite slow. And I think now more than ever we've got to be nimble and responsive if we really want to act at the right time to get the maximum outcomes. So when I read that any fare change is likely to have to be wrapped up in a business case, which is going to take a year, it just makes me very frustrated. And I think, did Queenstown, when they went to their no $1 fare or whatever it was, did they have to do a business case for that? Similarly, when Waikato Regional Council dropped their fare structure, did they have to do a business case? So I think we need to be careful that we don't make our processes bigger than Ben-Hur and wrap everything up in it, because otherwise we'll be bound up in very long time-consuming processes. It'll be a very long time before we can actually move the lever, and we've got to get fast action, and we need to be out there working with our community to get that. So just a very humble plea that we work closely with Waka Kotahi and that we try and find the fastest way through the morass of bureaucracy to get the best outcomes for our people.
Through you, Chair, I think in terms of my comment before was more around free fares and generally and rolling that nationwide and just acknowledging some of the guidance that we have at the moment around some of the disbenefits. And I think, by reviewing some of these policies, guidelines, we'll be really trying to understand where do we target the most user groups, where we can get the best value for money. There'll be ongoing opportunities for collaboration as we're reviewing these documents and working closely with the team here.
Thank you. Before I call Councillor Thurston, I think we'll make that the last one. Can I just say that our LPT questions are really self-fulfilling and predictable by us talking about free fares. Of course, people are going to ask for free fares and on whatever, but you've got to look at the practicalities, and that's what I urge staff to do really robust business cases for them, looking at the experience we've had in the past. I mentioned the one in Rotorua that was a failure, and I'm going to ask for a response on. We had a lot of community input into the increasing the Pies Park bus route, and we responded to that by putting that service on. Can staff please tell me what the outcome has been?
Yeah, so this was the additional bus stops out to the cemetery that you're referring to that we implemented last year. So initially we did have a really positive uptake, but off the top of my head, I think it's from November last year. It has not been used at all.
But it was not just the cemetery chair.
No,
it was to get senior citizens down
at the cemetery.
Thank you. I think the key, and I see Carol Gordon in the back of the room, she was making a plea that we have a better communication strategy through this past year for alerting our gold card users, our senior citizens, as to what's available and when. And I think that's the key for public transport, is that we actually make sure we have a really good communication strategy, so that if we are trialling something, if we're changing something, that actually we keep our community with us by giving good information and updates. If we've done something and it's not working, the beauty we have now is the B card, and we can give really robust data back, because small communities, and I can think of a couple, have made big pleas for things, and they say no one uses this service, please stop it, and then we can show hundreds of people are using the service. They say, oh, only 6 people get on the bus in this street, and we now have the ability to have really robust data to make good decisions based on evidence, and I think that's an absolute key going forward, that we actually have that data, have it available, so that we can show that we are being robust in our decision making. So to finish off before morning tea, you have a second opportunity.
If I'm incredibly brief, I know Commissioner Selwood wants to lead us off to morning tea, so if you'd allow me to be very, very brief, well, I'll go while he's talking, okay? If I can just say quickly about the carers, I think the key message that we need to send to the disability sector is that this council is committed to independence and resilience, and that's why we are rolling this out. But in doing that, we're also acknowledging that there is a percentage of people out there with disabilities who do need carer support. That's why I'm really plugging for an ID card or photo ID for the drivers in particular that states that I need carer support. And so if they've got someone accompanying it, they don't get into a stoush as the poor person's getting on the bus. Okay, and the other thing I wanted to quickly say too, in regards to the dropping of patronage in Rotorua, Toi Mai, pre-COVID, helped me out here, Phil, had a major marketing campaign targeting the Indian subcontinent, and I think a vast majority of the users of PT at Toi Mai were our Indian students who now, correct me if I'm wrong, have reverted to buying motor cars. They've all got cars, and the purpose is self-defeating. So they are the 2 points. So I will now let the chairman introduce Commissioner Scott.
Oh, will you? Go. You're between us and morning tea.
I know you're championing for morning tea, but really just want to reinforce the point I raised earlier in terms of the work program of the committee going forward. The issue of interdependency between each of the items from 7.2 through 7.4. And what I would hope and request is that we have a clear, in terms of the work program, we have a clear understanding of the scope of each of those projects and how they relate to one another and how they will inform one another. So if that could be incorporated into the work program, I think it would assist everyone to understand the relativities of each project.
I didn't see a nod from the staff. Any reaction?
Yeah, sounds like a great idea. Yeah, happy with that.
All right, so it is now about 12 minutes to 11. Can we come back at 11:05? I adjourn for morning tea.
process, COVID-19 has come along and significantly skewed the data, particularly in 2020. But notwithstanding those comments, really the purpose of the work is to get a much better understanding using that data around the needs of three key groups. The first of those is our regular users and customers, who we are extremely grateful to for keeping our network going. And I was really pleased to hear the presentation this morning from the two young ladies about how the bus network is important to them and their needs. You know, when we get up in the morning, that's what we should be thinking of. When we come to work, we are providing a network and designing services for real people with real needs, and those regular users are people we have to make sure that we protect their interests and give them more options in the future. But in addition to that, we have occasional users. These are people who are on the cusp of perhaps becoming more regular users, but need some additional improvements or encouragement to take that step. And I've lost count recently about the number of times that people who I don't know come up to me and say, I tried the bus this morning. You know what, it was really good. And when people say that, you almost think, well, what did they expect? Did they expect it to be a horrendous experience? Because actually, on the whole, it isn't. We provide a very, very good base service, and notwithstanding some challenges that we have, I think it really is important to recognise that we mustn't talk down the service that we provide, and recognise that when people use it, more often than not, the experience is actually very, very positive. We need to build on that for the future. And now that brings me to the non-users. And as colleagues in this forum have quite rightly said, ultimately we need a significant mode shift, and we need to speak to and understand the non-users, people who would like to try the bus. And in part, this is about trying to correct some of the misconceptions that some people have about the bus, and also to understand people's choices and lifestyles. Because fundamentally, transport choice comes down to how does my transport mode fit around my lifestyle, and is there any way that the bus can actually be part of that lifestyle, or do I need my car so much that it will never be an option for me? And that's the kind of discussion we've got to start to have with real people in real conversations. We also, in this process, need to consider the concerns that we do have from residents groups in a couple of areas, in particular Links Avenue and also Wairaki Avenue, Emerald Shores Drive. There are comments that there are too many buses, or too many buses running empty, or buses going too fast. And we have to ensure that our service is something that people value, even if they don't actually use it themselves, which might sound like a strange thing to say, but ultimately communities are about the needs of all people, and recognising that a bus service actually is an asset, not a threat. And in some parts of the corridor we're looking at, unfortunately, some very articulate and very pleasant residents are still finding that bus services are not what they want, and we need to try and work with those people to understand their concerns and do what we can to address them. We do need to identify further opportunities for improvements. So to be very clear, this optimisation process isn't just about tweaking at the edges. It is looking at some fundamental improvements to the way we plan and deliver our network, but with the caveat that it has to be done within existing budgets, so it's making better use of our spending. But in addition to that, one of the key aspects of this project is we're going out onto the network and taking a very, very close look at how things appear from a passenger perspective. And we believe there's an opportunity to identify improvements, particularly to infrastructure, that this project won't be able to implement, but we believe need to be considered in other business case work in particular. And I'll come on to some slides towards the end of the presentation to give a few ideas. We also do need to raise our game, I think, around marketing and publicity and not be shy about singing the praises of what works well and how good the service is for people and how we have really good and helpful drivers. You know, there's a lot of positives, and my view is we can do an awful lot more to make those positives part of the psyche of people in the Western Bay. And fundamentally, as I said at the start, it's about making better use of those existing budgets and demonstrating that we can actually make improvements without showering loads more money into the process. You know, we have to recognise that the National Land Transport Programme for the next 3 years is very, very, very constrained. So money is not going to be easy to come by, so let's make better use of what we've got. So in terms of the scope of optimisation, we're really looking at 4 key areas. So firstly, it's around the timings of services and whether those timings are optimum from a passenger perspective. And we've already identified a few areas where if you look at the timings on particular routes and also at the transfer points, there are some opportunities to improve the way those timings are actually delivered. The routes themselves, so are the routes actually going on the right roads? Is there a scope to change the routes to make those routes perhaps in some cases shorter and more frequent? Do we need to make sure those routes are efficient from a journey time perspective? So there's a whole load of options that we could look at to make sure those routes are actually the right ones and pick up the optimum number of people. So that's very much about accessibility from communities to the bus stop, to the bus service. I think there's also an opportunity to look at stopping patterns. So with 1 or 2 exceptions, most bus services in the corridor generally stop at all stops. We don't have too many express services other than really the 30X in the morning peak. And the further you get away from the CBD and the Mount Taunton towards Papamoa, the more important that a faster journey becomes because you're much further away. So maybe having a look at stopping patterns and asking ourselves whether every bus needs to call at every stop is something we should be considering. And then there's the vexed question of transfers, particularly at Bayfair and also the CBD, and the extent to which at the moment transfers are or are not appropriate. We're certainly getting feedback from customers that they feel they're being forced to transfer between services when actually a direct service would be more appropriate for their particular journey. And that's really a key part of the next section of the presentation, which is very much about what I call the polycentric challenge. So if you are a person in Papamoa, as noted by that little person icon towards the bottom right of the screen, you're faced with the challenge of trying to get a bus to a large number of centres that are spread out all over the city. So the coloured dots kind of indicate my very crude assessment of how many centres you can actually get to from a single service. So you've got the red dots, which entail the Plaza, Bayfair, Hewlett's Road and the CBD. You've got a second set of dots for travel into Mount Molineux itself and along Molineux Road and Totara Street. You've got a third set of dots around the hospital and Cameron Road, that's the green. You've got a fourth set of dots further down towards Greerton and over towards Windermere Campus. And then just hiding right at the bottom, almost off the map, you've got another dot around Tauriko. So you've got 5 centres there that someone in Papamoa may well say, I'd love a direct bus to go to each and every one of those, although of course I'd only ever use one. And the challenge we have is that providing direct services to each and every of those centres from somewhere like Papamoa, is a huge financial challenge to make. It's not the case, as is, say, in Wellington, where you have a very, very strong central business district where, frankly, most people want to go to. This is a very different type of environment from Wellington, because I often hear comparisons with Wellington. We have to appreciate that Tauranga and the Western Bay is very different. So this slide comes from the transport consultant and blogger Jarrett Walker. And what it attempts to do is to set out the difference between trying to provide direct services from 3 neighbourhoods to 3 destinations versus an option where you have the same neighbourhoods, same destinations, but in the middle you have a transfer point. So on the left-hand side, you have essentially a service pattern where from each of those 3 neighbourhoods, you have direct services to each of the 3 destinations, so the downtown, the college and the mall. So you can tell immediately this is an American slide. The connective option actually shows what happens when you have services travelling to a central point and then services travelling from that central point to the 3 destinations. And in essence, what it means is under the connective option, you can, or passenger can get any bus for that first stage of the trip to the centre point. Whereas under the direct service option, they have to wait for one of 3 buses, i.e. the direct service. And the point about this slide is that under the connective option, you can offer a much more frequent service for both the first and the second legs of the journey than you can under the direct service option. And that's with the same number of buses. And so what Jarrett Walker concludes from this slide is that if you provide a headway of 30 minutes for your direct services, that means your average waiting time is half of that, it's 15 minutes. You have your in-vehicle journey time of 20 minutes, so your total journey time is 35. That's under the direct service option. Under the connective option, because you have a choice of many more buses for the first leg, your headway is actually 10 minutes, and then your average waiting time is 5 minutes. Your transfer time, and this is the key bit, at the centre is 5 minutes, and therefore in total, your in-vehicle journey time is still 20 minutes, exactly the same. So the total journey time, even though there is an interchange in transfer time, is 5 minutes less compared with the direct service option. And that's just a reflection of the fact that people from the neighbourhood can essentially get any bus for the first part of their journey. Now, that's the theory. The reality, of course, is very different because we're actually looking at a real network. And for me, one of the key aspects is that transfer time, because in order for that connective option to work, the transfer time has to be guaranteed at no more than 5 minutes. Otherwise, people will miss their connection, and the total journey time, in all honesty, will probably be greater than the direct service option. And that gives us a real challenge because we know at the moment that getting guaranteed transfers, if there are delays, particularly as a result of traffic congestion and also highway works, particularly around the Bay Fair area, that's actually quite a challenge. So the reality is what we've got to do as part of the optimisation process is look at that theory that Jarrett Walker has set out and say, well, now, to what extent does that actually apply in practice, and can we actually make the transfer system work better. So for us, the consideration is the transfers, particularly at Bayfair and at the CBD, and where transfer continues to be required, making those as efficient and convenient as possible, but also considering the need to introduce some additional or new direct services where there is evidence that that transfer is actually forced and there's sufficient demand for that direct service to take place. So the reality is we're looking at a balanced approach. So we're not going away from what's been termed the hub and spoke network, but we are looking to try and make it better and understand how we can use our existing resources to get the journeys that actually people need. Now, there's a few slides here about interchange, because someone said to me the other day, Kiwis don't like interchange, they don't like transfers, and you can understand that, not many people do. But it really does depend on what your interchange looks like and what customer experience you have in it. So not only does the interchange need to be efficient in terms of time, but you need to have a great facility to be able to undertake that interchange. So this is the a schematic from the Auckland Design Guide about what a good interchange should look like based on quite a large number of services coalescing at this particular point. So this could be an interchange in the central area, or it could be a park and ride facility. But fundamentally, what this schematic shows is that there's an opportunity to fundamentally look at the way our interchange actually performs and how it looks to the customer. And that's quite different from the reality that we have now, as I'll see in a minute. Even if you don't have much space, which you need for that previous slide, you can still have interchange on street. This kind of configuration is from, I think it's Balmoral Road in Auckland. But again, it shows that you can have bus stops located on all sides of an intersection and relatively seamless interchange between them. So you've got covered walkways, you've got stops. It looks a lot different from what you might currently see out on most of the network, and that includes in Auckland. So AT have done a lot of work on this space, and for me, trying to get towards this kind of concept is in the future what we should be looking to do. Now, again, just to emphasise, optimisation isn't going to do all this stuff, but what we need to do is look at opportunities and how can we actually improve things on the ground. So the current interchange, this is at Bayfair, isn't quite live up to the standards in the AT document, and I should make it absolutely clear that is no criticism of the City Council as the infrastructure provider. Quite frankly, all of us, the Regional Council, City Council, and in this case the Bayfair Shopping Centre, need to work together to improve the facilities that we currently have there. It certainly isn't one organisation's fault or responsibility. This is an opportunity for us to say, we need to raise our game and do something different. And I'm well aware that the City Council is progressing a business case around the Bayfair interchange, and we're very supportive of that process. So we fully recognise that things will change for the better, and we'll get something much more appropriate than we currently have. I'm also very keen, as part of this process, to look at legibility from a customer and passenger perspective. So on the left-hand side, you have an image from Hamilton, which just provides a really good indication of how you can make your local streetscape very navigable and interesting. You'll see on that slide there is a clear link to, or clear direction to the transport centre in the Hamilton CBD. So in most of the signs in Hamilton, the transport centre is present, so people have no problem in understanding where it is and how to get there. The top right-hand picture is of a bus shelter and minor interchange in Wellington. And to my mind, this is the sort of thing we need to start aspiring to, where we have bus stops that are actually very well branded, we have good passenger facilities that are sheltered from the weather. We have really good information, a clear sense that yes, you are arriving at a bus stop, and that bus stop is going to provide you as the customer, with a good, safe, dry experience, which in Wellington is particularly necessary. So whether we go for that standard or something different, in my view, we've got to raise again, collectively again, both councils to provide better facilities. There's a couple of examples at the bottom there where at the moment the facilities in the Western Bay are not really what we would ultimately like to see. So as part of the public transport services infrastructure business case, but also as part of this, if there are opportunities to improve bus stops along the corridor in conjunction with the services, then we really want to be taking those. Quite finally, I'd like to introduce a new toy that we're thinking of purchasing to help us with our work in optimisation. So this is a software package called Remix, which enables us to use existing public data. So that's all the service information from the GTFS. It includes census data. We can also add our own data into it if we're able to. And essentially what it allows you to do is to put a little pin in the centre of the map, which is denoted by that lady, whose name is Jane. And at any point, you can immediately pull up, in this instance, the estimate of how far Jane can get within a certain amount of time from her location to whatever the destinations there are on the plan. We can also look at things like if we change a bus route, how many people within 400 metres does that bus route serve compared with the previous route? So you can actually look at the changes in accessibility. And because it's census data, you can do it by demographic group as well. So we could actually tell how many older people, for example, who perhaps might have more issues with walking to a stop would be either benefited or disbenefited from a change in a route. So just to make the point that we are making this exercise not only very data-led, which it needs to be, but also very visually appealing, because one of the things we must do is ensure that if we are going to make changes, we can actually explain and justify those to our stakeholders and customers, and actually also give them the opportunity to say what they would do instead, because this tool is something that could actually be used by our customers themselves, so they could actually play transit planner and understand the issues that we have when we're trying to decide what route we would like to put a bus on, how frequent it would like to be, or what time periods it would like to be. The software also includes costs as well, so we can actually see if we make a change, let's say we double the frequency of a route, we can see how much additional funding that would cost to implement, and therefore if we wanted to make that change, we could then look at a route elsewhere and save some money. So we can do those trade-offs within this piece of software. So what it allows to do is make decisions and test options much, much quicker than we could if we were having to make a load of suggestions and then perhaps go to the bus company and then spend a few weeks arguing with them about what the data actually means. We can rapidly test them and then go to the bus company and work with them to look at what changes we could actually make in this process. And speaking of the bus company, I think it's really, really important to emphasise that the partnership working we need with those folks at NZ Bus is key to making this a success. So this is not in any shape or form an exercise where we're going to go out and say there's a whole load of things here that we don't like and therefore it's the bus company's fault. The bus company has made a lot of effort to improve the way that it delivers its services and has made some very constructive suggestions for potential changes to routes and service patterns across the Western Bay. And so this is a great opportunity, particularly for the planning colleagues, people in my team, to establish a really great relationship with with NZ Bus, which our colleagues in public transport operations have worked really hard to improve over the last couple of years. So I think the key message, just to finish, is that partnership and engagement, collaboration, and a no-blame culture is key to this optimisation project, and it's something that I'm very keen to ensure we move forward into further pieces of work. So those are the recommendations. Be very grateful for any comments, and also ultimately I hope your support in moving this work forward.
So, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. I was quite excited by it because I think this clearly underlines for me how we can apply exactly the sort of principles I was talking about before in a real case study approach, but also as a practical demonstration of the interdependencies between kind of street knowledge, which is what this is about, and our wider strategic thinking. And I think this is an ideal case study that can then inform the wider story. I love your focus on users and non-users for all the reasons I said before, and I love the app. That brings real life to the reality of the challenge that we're facing. Will help us get the answers. I did some work just in familiarising myself to Tauranga and this fantastic app that the Statistics Department have called Waka. And it shows origins and destinations by 2018 census data. And I had a look at Te Papa as a kind of case study. Where do people come from when they're going to work in Te Papa? And the answer was they originate from 71 different destinations across Tauranga. And therein lies the challenge of providing a viable public transport service for people who not only have diverse origins, but actually have diverse trips along their route as well. So this kind of analysis, I think, is fundamental to us understanding. I just want to let you know that the long-term plan for Tauranga City Council provides for about 100 current bus stops to be provided per annum. There's about 400 that are kind of en route, so that means it's going to take us 3, maybe 4 years to get the majority of them covered. And this sort of exercise is key to understanding the priority as to where those covered bus stops should go. You'll also be aware of the $45 million Crown Infrastructure Partners initiative for Cameron Road, and we are highly motivated to make that an exemplar of great passenger transport services and related to the subsequent item on electrified buses or certainly low carbon emission buses. It would be fantastic to make Cameron Road the first exemplar of what that might look like. So I think there's tremendous opportunities in front of us here, and this kind of detailed analysis informing wider strategy is going to be fundamental to success. So well done.
Thank you very much. I mean, I just fully support and endorse everything you said. Looking forward to working with you folks to get things really moving in Tauranga. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, James. I'll just say that another example of good data we got on a route in Tauranga, actually at Patamar, actual data, sign off, sign on, using the B card. And when the B card was this was for the month of August, we've been asked to go and meet the local community who had issues, and they said that only 6 people a day use the bus. And when we got this data, it turned out that in the month of August, 3,032 boardings or getting off were recorded, which is 101 a day. So, they're saying 6, and we showed evidence, and that allows, and that's where the B card really shows its worth, and that's what we've got to aim for, is good, robust, data-driven decision-making. So, I think our staff are doing really good work in this area.
Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. And look, I'm an occasional visitor to Tauranga, so I can't express any particular knowledge of the issues around public transport in Tauranga and the Mount. However, loved your presentation. I look at that and I see that if this works for you as a review process, this is a tool to take out to all our communities, all our areas. You know, when you put up that slide with the 4 buttons, that's what we're needing to do in every area. So I did pick up on your comment about transfers, and you mentioned Wellington, and you know, I've lived for a long time in Wellington, and it's basically one route in and out, you know, and I think, you know, the transfers, yes, we saw howls of protests in the paper for about a year in Wellington where they dared make people transfer on buses, you know, and it's settled down now, but it just shows you how entrenched people get around things. I love the look of this transit planning tool, if it is a production tool and not, you know, I've worked in the computer industry for a long time, and I know many salesmen who promise the earth and it doesn't quite deliver. But if it's a functioning tool already, I think this is a fantastic tool for plugging data in. What I like about it is it's a little bit like America's Cup. You can put your scenarios in there and test them out without inflicting them on the public on the public using buses. So great work.
Thank you so much for your kind comments. And yes, just to provide some reassurance, Remix, which is the software tool that's highlighted in that presentation, it's used extensively by Auckland Transport, Waikato Regional Council, and also Horizons Regional Council. And as part of our due diligence, we had a long session with Luke Elliott at AT and actually asked him, well, is it as good as the salesman told us it was? And his answer was, yes, it is. We use it all the time. And without it, we couldn't have planned the network changes in Auckland at the speed and scale that they actually managed to do so. So yeah, it's I'm with you. I'm always sceptical when someone comes on with a shiny new toy. But I think in this instance, I'm actually really convinced that it's what we actually need, both from a planning point of view and from a public engagement point of view.
A quick follow-up on that, just answer. Look, I also look at this, and I do wonder, I mean, I've lived overseas and used public transport extensively over there. Where I live now, there is no public transport, so I'm a little bit like Councillor Nees. If there was a park and ride, I might be able to use it. But I wonder, is there, you know, I mean, we look at declining patronage everywhere, actually, other than the free school kids in Tauranga. And is there a population density we need in an area to actually get that target of increased public transport use over cars? You know, are we fighting a losing battle because we just don't have the density of population?
Yeah, I mean, that really for me is the fundamental nub of the problem. If you look at what's happened in the UK, in 1997, when Tony Blair, if you remember him, came to power, he had exactly the same mode shift agenda as the current government has now, for all the reasons that we're going through. And fundamentally, for quite a few years, the mode shift didn't really happen in the way that the government thought it was. So people like myself were very enthusiastic. We set all kinds of targets for getting more people cycling and on buses. And for a few years, it didn't really happen. And the reason for that was that we weren't really able to understand that fundamentally driving public transport use is high density and the move to sustainable cities. So back in the 1980s in particular, in the UK, people moved out of cities to the countryside because they thought that that was a better quality of life. It's what they wanted. They could look at green fields and cows and all that sort of stuff. And then by the 1990s, and particularly the 2000s, a lot of people realised actually the countryside wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And so a lot of people came back to the cities, and more importantly, the young people now actually want to live in vibrant cities because there's pubs, there's clubs, there's activities all within walking distance. They don't have to travel 40 minutes on a bus to go to the nearest night spot. So understanding that social demographic and land use change is absolutely crucial. In answer to your question, the densities that I know are being looked at are something like sort of 30 to 35 dwellings per hectare in terms of what would be an ideal from a sort of Western Bay perspective. So I'm not pretending it's a long it's not getting a short journey in terms of getting mode shift. Ultimately, it is about getting far more people to live in a vibrant city. Having said that, in the short term, there's still a lot we can do to optimise the network and understand how people travel and get that mode shift started. So I'm not suggesting we've got to wait 20 years, as we did in the UK, before people flew back to the cities because they realised the countryside wasn't what they thought it was and it smelled. So it's a long-term and a short-term challenge we've got, and we need to be cognizant of both.
All right, no further questions? Thank you very much for that presentation. Now we'll move to the recommendations on page 58. That we received the report, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Page 45. 45, there we go. So there's 3 recommendations. You can see them there on page 45. With someone
Happy to move, Chairman.
Moved, Councillor Thurston, seconded Mr. Thomas. Any discussion? There being none, all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. All right, we move now, I think, to page 58. 58. Bus fleet carbonisation, and we are looking for James again. Now, just before you start, we're sitting, we were due to close at 12:25 and then have lunch. We'll see if it's with your approval, try to get it finished before we have lunch, which looks, so we'll aim to try to clean up by 1 p.m. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I shall promise to make this presentation pretty quick and certainly not take you through the gory detail of the paper, which is quite technical in nature. So really the driver for this bus decarbonisation work is the government direction which was received just after Christmas, which was that the public transport fleet, which currently numbers about 2,500 urban and interurban buses in New Zealand, will need to be fully decarbonised by 2035. So no conventional diesel buses running around by that date. But also the government's direction is that by 2025, that's only 4 years away, no new diesel buses should be purchased and introduced into urban or interurban fleets. And so given that there are less than 40 non-conventional diesel buses in the whole of New Zealand, including the 5 that we have here in the Western Bay, that's a huge challenge from a planning, logistical and funding stroke financing point of view. So my paper is really a sort of glass half empty type of analysis. It goes through all the challenges and effectively says we've got to do a lot more work pretty quickly to get some answers to those questions. This presentation, I want to try and be a bit more positive and say, well, what are the opportunities that we would like to grasp as part of this work, which we know is coming. Also worth pointing out, as we've noted several times, it isn't just about decarbonising buses, it's about getting significantly more people to use those decarbonised buses as opposed to the private car. So I'm not pretending that simply decarbonising our fleet will magically solve the climate change problem, but nevertheless, that's what we have to do. This slide was actually taken from a Scottish Government presentation, and what it shows is that having a single vision for what decarbonised buses should do is actually very, very difficult. This was a vision statement that I've actually butchered into 7 different visions depending on your point of view. So, for a bus operator, you're committed to exclusively running zero emission vehicles. If you're interested in economic development, you're looking at how your domestic manufacturing sector and supply chain can actually create more high-skilled jobs. If you're a customer, on the right-hand side of that screen, you can enjoy travelling on the bus. Know you're doing the right thing. You're in a climate-friendly mode and you're helping to save the planet. So all of those visions are actually valid and need to be reflected in the work that we do. So this isn't simply about reducing climate greenhouse gas emissions, although that's a very, very vital driver, but it's also about recognising and taking advantage of all of these other opportunities. And this next slide, again, borrowed from a Scottish presentation, just simply sets out pretty simply what the opportunity looks like. So we have energy generation at the top of that slide, which we're pretty lucky in New Zealand. It's certainly a lot more sustainable than many countries, particularly the UK. So we already have an advantage in terms of the fact that a lot of our energy generation is actually already pretty good from a greenhouse gas perspective. But then once you've generated the energy, you have the need for various networks to get that energy into the transport system. So you've got the energy transmission and distribution networks yourselves, you've got the transport infrastructure required, and also the digital infrastructure, particularly around how you monitor the performance of an electric or hydrogen vehicle fleet. There's going to need to be a lot of investment in depot facilities. I think bus depots, rather like interchanges, are going to have to look very, very different in the future. So having the charging facilities and the power that feeds into those charging facilities from the network is going to be important. Having an expanded and skilled workforce to be able to maintain, improve that fleet, and also the refuelling capacity as well, making sure that that is optimised. So there's going to be a lot more about depots and making sure those depots are located in the right places for the decarbonised fleet. You then have the manufacturing and the supply chain side of it. So there's a lot of opportunities for local companies to get a piece of the action and help us deliver what is a substantial amount of vehicle and infrastructure capacity. And linked to that is very much around in creating a skilled service sector and the sort of maintenance and the warranty for both buses and also all the equipment that's used in a decarbonised fleet. And then that cycles round into the future. So one thing you can say about the decarbonised bus agenda is that it will change quicker and you can almost keep up with it. So even material I put in my paper, I'm starting to actually read other stuff now, which suggests it might even be out of date and things have moved on. It's that quick. And so that design, research and development sector is actually going to be crucial for not only creating the assets, but how you redeploy them, how you remanufacture and recycle. Recycling is a key part of the process, often forgotten. What happens to an asset, such as a battery, at the end of its life? It doesn't just disappear. There needs to be a clear strategy for how you manufacture, recycle, dispose of the assets you've created. All of that generates big opportunities in terms of the economy. In terms of capital costs, at the moment, this is an assessment from the Auckland Transport Low Emission Bus Roadmap, which is an excellent publication for bedtime reading. At the moment, the price of a conventional diesel bus, give or take, is about $400,000. And when this roadmap was written in about 2015, 2016, the equivalent of battery electric bus was in the region of just under 900,000. And that's already come down now to about $750,000 in 2020. And the prediction is that that capital cost differential will pretty much erode by about 2030, 2031, depending on which analysis you believe. And that also applies to hydrogen buses, which at the moment are actually more expensive. They tend to be about $1 million or so, because they're much less well developed. So yes, although capital costs are higher at the moment, the differential is coming down as more and more buses come on stream, manufacturing capacity ramps up. You also have then the operating costs, and this is really interesting data, real data, from the Auckland Transport trials of battery electric buses. So they show a couple of different buses, an ADL versus a Yutong. Both have the same, the diesel versions of those buses are about 78 cents per kilometre to run. And you compare that with the battery electric buses on 3 different routes on the left-hand side and 4 different routes on the right-hand side, and you can see that the operating costs are about a quarter of the conventional diesel. So what that does tell you is that yes, there's a lot of capital investment up front, but the operating costs are significantly cheaper, and that's at the moment. There may be scope to make that cheaper still in the future. That's actually it in terms of the presentation. There's a lot of technical detail, as I've said, in the report, which I'm happy to talk through. But fundamentally, firstly, I'd like you to receive the reports, and secondly, to approve the outline of the feasibility study that we're proposing to undertake that's included in the report. We would like to request that there's a recommendation to council to include a sum of $300,000 for that feasibility study within the deliberations of the long-term plan. It is important that we get on with the work to assess what are the best optional options for the Bay of Plenty fleet. That's both within Western Bay and also within the other areas of the region, because every sub-region will probably have, or will have, different needs, different circumstances, and will need a solution that's fit for purpose for that particular geography. So that's what the feasibility study will start to work out. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you for that presentation. Can I just have a clarification? The 300,000 that you're talking, is this a joint feasibility with Waikato?
It's not a joint feasibility with Waikato, but if we are able to understand Waikato's thinking, then there may be an opportunity either for some cost savings or to do some more work that currently we would put off into the future, but actually would be a good idea to do now, particularly around things like hydrogen, because you can get into quite a lot of technical detail. At this stage, we're trying to just work out what the best options are at a strategic level. So collaboration with Waikato is certainly very high on my agenda. I'll be going to see my counterpart, Andrew Carnell, hopefully in the next few weeks to discuss that. Also worth emphasising that at New Zealand level as a whole, the Transport Special Interest Group, which represents all of the regional councils, is also doing some high-level work to produce its own roadmap of what decarbonisation across New Zealand would look like. Because it's pretty clear, even if you read the Auckland Transport Roadmap, which is a really, really good document, when you actually get into it, when it was written 2 years ago, they're still actually quite unclear about what the best option is for a lot of their network. And that's a really well-resourced and very, very competent operator. What it goes to show is that all of us need to be working very, very closely to ensure that we're covering all the bases as quickly as possible and not duplicating the work we're doing. So I'm actually involved in the Transport Special Interest Group, and I may possibly even lead the study that's been undertaken at that level. So you can be very confident we're not going to do the same work twice.
It's very good to hear. Thank you. Councillor Mead, then Councillor Brennan, you.
I think, James, thank you. James has just allayed my concerns. I just noticed the number of different streams of work that's happening. You've got MOT doing work, you've got Waka Kotahi doing work, you've got the Transport Sig doing work, you've got other regional councils doing work. And I just wanted to make sure that we weren't duplicating in any way, but that we were linking in. Because I think it's really important. Say, for example, Waka Kotahi comes out with an amendment to the RUB which says that you've got to use this sort of bus, just like they did with the bigger buses previous in their Patron. If they come out and saying, well, if you're transitioning to zero carbon buses, this is the standard, then all of our work has been for naught. So it's just really important that we try and link it all together and don't duplicate. So thank you, James.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this really concerns me. This is the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, a small part of New Zealand and an even smaller part of the world, and we're talking about whether we're going to be using electricity or we're going to be using hydrogen. And hydrogen hasn't been proved around the world. We haven't looked at the cost of hydrogen. It's a major, and until we get some clear data, who are we to be making judgments on this sort of thing? So I'm loath to spend this sort of money on something that surely there should be some national direction on, and we should have some collaboration around the country as to what the direction should be, rather than us going off and doing all this research ourselves. So at this stage, I can't support this. I know where we've got to go to, but this is just another add-on.
Perhaps we could get a comment from you, Cole?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think James has alluded to some of the national pieces of work that's underway through MOT, through ourselves, through the RUB review. I think it'll just be really important, like what James has said, just to stay connected as that work proceeds, and make sure that this work is providing that sort of additional place-based value as well, specific to the region, and just being able to take some of the learnings from that other sort of national piece of work that's underway as well.
I mean, hopefully to provide some reassurance, because I do agree with your concern about the fact that there needs to be that national direction and guidance. The challenge we've got here in the Bay is that from 2024, we will be starting the process of re-tendering our networks, in 3 years' time. And so we've got to actually start making some informed decisions about the future method of propulsion for services in Rotorua in 2024, Eastern Bay 2025, and Western Bay 2028. So what this feasibility study aims to do is to outline how we're going to execute the government direction at the local level. So this isn't about doing research and coming up with papers about what great ideas we could possibly have. This is what are the options that are actually going to make sense here, and how are we going to implement them in practice. So a good example is the depots. We know that if we're going to implement decarbonised buses, we're going to need larger depots. We're going to need depots that have got charging or refueling facilities, depending on the method of propulsion. And we're going to need to ensure that we've got the sufficient capacity from electricity generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure in the right place. So we've got to start looking at where the depots potentially are going to go, because they may not be in the right locations at the moment, and they're probably not. So it is getting down to the practical level, saying how are we actually going to make this work in the Bay of Plenty, given that we have got the government direction. It isn't just another think piece about what a great idea it could be. We've got to start practical action ultimately what it's going to cost, because the big question that the government haven't answered yet is who's going to ultimately pay for all of the vehicle and associated electricity supply infrastructure, because the $50 million that has been announced so far by the Transport Minister is not going to cover it.
Mr. Chairman, can I suggest we invite the Transport Minister here to
Explain.
put our questions to him?
Good suggestion. Are you ready to vote on the, it seems to be no further questions.
I'm happy to move. We're only making a recommendation. Council can have its own debate through the long-term plan, but I'm happy to move.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Thomas first. Noting that you've moved.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to second as well. Look, thank you for your report, James, and look, I acknowledge what Councillor Benning said around, concerns around the cost of this. I do think this is an area that's moving incredibly quickly, and I was really pleased you made mention of contracts that are coming up for renewal shortly. 3 years will be gone like that, and for Rotorua it's an issue. We would love to see decarbonised buses there. Just as we want to see high patronage, we have a real air quality problem in Rotorua. So decarbonising and getting people on buses is a great thing for us. In your report, I noticed you just went through 4 options. I wondered, and it's looking at the bus fleet in Rotorua, which is very new. The Continental Ritchie's just, rejigged their fleet a few years ago. Will you look at the viability of perhaps retrofitting buses or converting buses to decarbonised energy sources?
Yes, we absolutely will. So interestingly, this morning I was just reading the Auckland Transport Low Emissions Roadmap. It actually has a lot more detail about the pros and cons of retrofitting than the other report which I used in my submission, which was the KPMG one, which didn't actually go into retrofitting in much detail at all. So what it goes to show is you can read 2 different reports on the same subject, and they focus on totally different areas, and actually what you need is that holistic view of all the stuff out there and come to a sensible view. So retrofitting, I think, has to be seriously considered, because you hit on an absolutely essential point, which is if we have a total fleet decarbonisation, what do we do with the often very new diesel buses that are still being introduced to fleets in New Zealand even now? Those buses have a 20-year asset life. And if we're saying that we're starting to withdraw those buses in 2 or 3 years' time when we get towards 2025, what happens to them? So I think retrofitting as a practical means of trying to make best use of those existing assets that we've paid for is absolutely essential. Now, whether it proves to be more viable than just simply saying we'll remove those buses and get a new fleet, only time will tell. But again, the feasibility study needs to look at that and how it would work from a Bay of Plenty perspective. That's really interesting, isn't it? That in Wellington, they used to have decarbonised buses. They were called trolley buses. And they were withdrawn, of course, because the infrastructure, the overhead catenary was deemed to be too expensive to replace. And now we're going back towards decarbonised buses again.
And it'd be great to see those buses repurposed or, rejigged. But just want to stress that in Rotorua, we would quite like smaller buses. So, let's fix our ones up, but give them to someone else.
So first.
Thank you, Chairman. Just seeking your acceptance of a 4th recommendation, picking up on Councillor Bunning's comments that we invite Minister Wood to appear either in person or by Zoom.
Yes, I've had that on my notepad to it, so
I'm happy to move if you'll accept.
I'll accept it. I will accept that. That's not out of line with anything, so I'll second it for you. Councillor Rose, and then Councillor Thompson, and then hopefully we can get into the last. It's great.
I can hear the food calling our names slowly. Look, James, I just wanted to ask a question in regards to your communications with Priority One, because obviously you're doing a bit of work around hydrogen. So what kind of communications have you had with Priority One?
So myself and two colleagues met Mark Irving from Priority One about a month before Christmas, and we were treated to a tour de force of his views about hydrogen being the way forward. Absolutely brilliant and very passionate presentation. And so a key part of our work will be to engage with Mark and colleagues in Priority One to understand not only what are the opportunities around hydrogen, but also irrespective of the mode of propulsion we use in any area, what are the wider economic opportunities within the supply chain, the manufacturing, the skills for young people around maintaining the buses, research and development, all those sorts of things. So Priority One are key to all of this, because it's not just, as I said, about saving greenhouse gases, important though that is, it's about the economic opportunity for the Bay of Plenty. And so Priority One are key to all of that. And so I see them being a partner in this study. They have to be.
Thank you. And the final one, Councillor Thompson.
Oh, yeah, thanks for that. Fascinating. I think the exciting thing for me is the potential to move to smaller buses, and your remix software, whatever it is, should be the wonderful tool to be able to show where we actually can have smaller buses on our network. So that to me is really exciting. Thank you.
All right. We have in addition to the recommendations that we had a fourth one to invite the Minister of Transport to talk to us. Minister Wood. Yeah. 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 Did you get that? We won't name him as Mr. Wood, just the Minister of Transport, in case there is a change. It's the Minister of Transport we want, so whoever it be. You're happy with that wording, Councillor Thurston?
Of course, Chair.
Okay. Any discussion? Let's move all four as one. All those in favour, please say aye. You're looking worried, Jane.
Oh, just have we finished with the words?
Nearly.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Carried on the voices. We move quickly. These are information reports only now. So we go to page 78, and it is Mamuta.
Actually, I think it's me.
What? Is that? Not according to life? But anyway, go.
Basically, due to the rumbling tumblings, I'm just going to take this as read. I'm happy to answer any questions.
You go, Jane.
I have a question on page 81. Are those total figures correct? I just wonder whether they're not.
The total patronage by under the tertiary free trial. So it's not necessarily the full patronage for a particular service. It's just the ones that have got their tertiary free trial applied.
Right, so you're not summing all of these up? Because that's just a repeat for the town to Rotorua line.
Oh yes, I see that question. Yeah, obviously not though.
So the total is 7,500 roughly. Tertiary trial patronage.
Can I just comment on page 79, your patronage report there for school bus trials. If you take from 2000, rather than have a minus 57 change in patronage in 2019, and then a plus 93,000 in 2020. If we do that, go from 218 to 220, the average increase over that two-year period is actually 7.8% increase. So it's putting the minus in the plus makes it a different looking picture. Any further questions on this report? To receive the report only.
Move that this report be made its content.
So it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Moving on. 89, public transport technology update. So, Jess, are you leading this?
I'll be introducing.
Thank you.
So I have Stacey Brooks coming in here and Melissa Winters here, who are part of our transport operations team and have been an integral part of improving our PT technology solutions over, I was going to say last year, but it's probably been a bit longer than that. So we do receive a lot of questions, particularly from people in this committee around our technology and what we're doing. So we thought it was quite timely to provide a report which details, and a presentation which details some of the improvements that have been made over the past year, but then also some of the things we're currently working on for further improvements. So I'll hand over to Melissa and Stacey.
Thank you. Jess has just stolen my introduction, so we'll just rip straight into it. Yes. No. Sorry, I haven't used one of these before.
James might have taken the recycling. Got a seldom
technology, eh? The report you've got in front of you gives you quite a bit of detail about the technology changes that have happened in the last year. And so this presentation is just to give you a visual idea of some of the information that's now available to us and also to our public. So you've already talked about B-cards this morning, I believe. The B-card rollout was brought forward quite significantly due to COVID, and that's because of the potential for contact tracing with the registered cards and also reducing the need for cash handling on the buses. The biggest advantage of the new system from our customers' point of view is that they can top up their cards online. They can view their own balance, they can order replacement cards and set up a auto top-up like you can with the toll roads. They can also use their cards in a number of regions around New Zealand, including Northland, Waikato, Taranaki, Hawke's Bay, Otago and Southland. The biggest advantage for us as staff is that we've now got one single ticket system region-wide, and the tag-on, tag-off data gives us a much clearer picture of the journeys that our customers are taking.
So the slide above is showing the new system that we switched to in December, 18th of December last year. This replaced Swiftly as our real-time prediction engine, and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council is one of the flagship councils, and this company is a New Zealand-run company. The biggest advantage to the council, as well as the B-card, is that this brings all of our operators from all across the region into the same system. By taking our bus locations directly from the ticket machines, our tracking is a lot more accurate, which feeds through to Transact, making the system more reliable for our customers. So this is another screen showing what Dynamis can do. Sorry, I'll just switch over. using Dynamics, we can easily see the route that the bus is travelling on. So this is live tracking, and ourselves and the customer contact team can log into this. They can see which bus the travelling up is on, which trip, the next stop, when it was scheduled to start, and versus the actual start time. This is used by us, our operators, as well as our internal customer contact team. And since this system has been operating, it has increased the amount of questions that can be answered through the contact centre team, as opposed to getting any further by using these types of tools. So here's just a short video to show how we can use it in a replay. If somebody rings up, you can look up there, you can change the date, you can search the time, you can search the route or a vehicle. If you're looking for a vehicle in particular, you can push play and it will show you all of the buses that were active within that selection that you've chose. You can scroll across the top there and it will take you to the time. You can see that the time it was. And once you've found the bus that you're looking for, you can highlight the bus and it will show you all of the details. So this is how the customer team are filtering questions that don't need to go any further, because they can answer all of that information directly via the system.
Transit app's now available on all of the routes across our region, except for 3. So route 131 from Whakatane to Matata, and 85, which runs around Waihi Beach and Waihi, are run by small vans, and we will add them to the system once we get our trackers onto those 2. The third one that's not in Tracker Bus currently is Route 150, which runs from Potaka to Opotiki. And that particular one has some gaps in the cell phone reception along there, which makes it pretty tricky to have reliable tracking. Transit app continues to be really well used. In the last 4 weeks, there were 185,000 sessions opened by about 6,000 unique devices, so that's individual cell phones. We acknowledge that it hasn't been working well, particularly in the last 12 months, but with our change of data system just before Christmas, it's now much better. We're not hearing complaints about Ghostbusters anymore, which is wonderful. We're planning some promotion for Transit app, including promotion in Tauranga that says, please have another try. And promotion in Rotorua and Whakatane to say, here's our great new tool, please give it a go. Something else new that went live right around Christmas time was live tracking on the Baybus website. So you can see on the screen there, by choosing live tracking on a particular route, you can now see exactly what the route is. You can see where the buses are that are currently running on that route, and you can see each individual bus stop. By clicking on a bus stop, you can then see the next live departures scheduled from that particular bus stop. In this example on the screen, there's one bus currently running on this route, but if you go and look at it live, sometimes you'll see several different buses in different directions running along the same trip. This has been configured to work on a mobile phone or a desktop screen. And it's using the same information that feeds into Transit app, so they'll all show exactly the same information. Digital signage is something that Tauranga City Council are working on in Tauranga. They've currently got 2 large digital screens at Willow Street, overhead screens, and they've also got 12 e-paper signs, which are the ones, the picture on the screen there. That's like a Kindle screen, and it shows you the next departures from the stop that you're standing at. Most of them have also got an audio module installed where you can push a button and the screen will read out to you what it says, which is great for visually impaired people. We have had some issues with this system just at the moment. A Vodafone outage in January caused some malfunctions in the screens, and we're still waiting for the supplier to resolve all of those issues. So although Tauranga City Council are responsible for the screens themselves, the data that feeds into them for the displays comes from our system.
So with the new ticket machines, we've also been able to pull so much more information-rich data. So this is one of our dashboards that you can see that we've been collating. It's pulled directly from Init. They're able to break down data to show patronage by route, by ticket class, and the time of the day. This information is used for monitoring, reporting, and planning purposes. We compare the revenue pulled in this report to the finance team to ensure the confidence across both reports. The fields collected include but are not limited to the trip time and date, printed card numbers, tag-ons, tag-offs, passenger type, so child, super gold, and payment method. We've also got the same information, but by bus stop usage. So this is also helpful to our local authorities who own the bus stop infrastructure. It is useful when reviewing current bus stop routes and measuring demand. Infrastructure decisions on where to put shelters or seating, as well as time of day to see which stops may benefit from additional lighting, so heavily morning or evening patronage.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm going to be very specific about Millers Road. So I see people standing at a bus sign every day, quite a number of them, and on the top of Waihi Road. So what does this actually tell you about the need to actually provide a shelter?
So we're working in conjunction with the local authorities. We've done a lot more, I'd say, in the space in the Rotorua area, but we're able to provide them the bus stop infrastructure information, so showing which bus stops have what infrastructure, so if they have a stop, what shelter, what type of shelter, and then we're also providing this information to them monthly, so the bus stop usage information to Rotorua, so they can compare that information against what's already there infrastructure-wise. So they've been very surprised by some of the stops that have been much more heavily used than they ever thought before. So they're using the infrastructure information alongside the bus stop usage to make decisions for the future.
Thank you.
Councillor Up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a member of this committee, but I always attend it because I think it's vital to the future of Tauranga. And I was very interested in the app which you mentioned, and I've just put my home address into the app on my phone, and it tells me I can be home in an hour's time from now. I can drive it in 10 minutes, which I think points to the issue which this committee actually faces and the problems which we face in Tauranga because of its peninsula-based, diverse geography.
Noted. Can we finish your presentation and then we'll go into questions after that?
Absolutely. This slide here is just showing that same data from the map before. It's just showing it in a different way.
So like anything to do with technology, we're constantly looking to improve the systems we're running, and what's available for us to use is constantly changing as well. We've got a number of focus areas looking forward, and the three that I'd like to mention is firstly improving our reporting capability, including on-time performance monitoring, patronage reporting, and contract management. We're working closely with Waikato Regional Council on a lot of these reports because they're using the same background systems and we can share development work. Secondly, we would love to be able to provide real-time service change notifications for our customers. So if a bus is running late, we'd like a notification to pop up on their phone that says your bus is running late by 3 minutes or whatever the time is. Or trips that aren't running for any reason, or if there's been an accident or breakdowns, things like that. So there's a lot of work going on in the background to work out the best ways to do that. And the last thing we're looking at is next stop announcements. The Tauranga fleet was equipped with screens for that back in December 2018. And the systems to run that are so complicated, it's taking time to work them out, but that's one of our priorities for this year. And as this is the simplified version of how things work, and as you can see, the relationships are all very complex. The passenger-facing information relies on every single step of the process being successful, and this is a process of continuous improvement. Thank you for listening, and if there are any further questions, please let us know.
Thank you. I'll just start off. Back in February, and I'm hoping it's been fixed, I had a look at one of the stops on the Cameron Road, and it showed the buses coming in -1 minute, which means that it wasn't live. So I believe that's been rectified. Am I correct in that?
There were some issues with the Vodafone outage that have just scrambled something in those displays, and so that is being worked on by the supplier.
So it's not resolved yet, is what you're doing?
It's not resolved yet, no, they've told us 2 weeks.
I think we're hoping for another week from now.
Okay, so that's, Commissioner, those are your machines, and I think they're fantastic, but they do have to work live, so that people have confidence, because the biggest impediment to getting no shift change is confidence in the system, that when you see something, and even if it's late, you know exactly when it's coming, when it's expected to come, and therefore you can wait with confidence for it. If you don't know, if you don't have that live information, then people won't use the service because they're not sure when the bus is coming. Now, we've had that system in place. I went in 2005 to Christchurch, and they had it operating effectively. It's always operated in Wellington and Auckland, but Christchurch had it operating by 2005, and it's been very slow to get here. But I think along with the B card, it's a game changer for us. So please make sure that development, that continuous improvement, because I don't see any other way of getting patronage increase.
Certainly, thank you.
Any questions? Anybody? Councillor Rhodes first, and then Thomas.
Being a regular user of the bus system and a regular user of Transit app, I can say myself that it is a good app. However, have staff looked into other avenues other than transit? Because I know transit is more of a national, it's a nationwide app. I used it in Palmerston North just last weekend. And so I'm just saying if you guys have looked into any potential ways of kind of just doing one for the region, or if we're just going to stick with transit.
Transit app is an international app. It's available in close to 300 cities around the world, so you can open the transit app that works in Tauranga, in Montreal or San Francisco or London or Brisbane, anywhere, and it will work. We haven't looked into having a bespoke product built for this region simply because of the cost of that. But there are several alternatives to Transit app out there that will display our information.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Look, love the Transit app. I think those are things we need, especially to get younger people using the buses. In the report, you actually mentioned Google Maps as well. Is that the website that you were showing us, or is that as well as the website and the app?
Google Maps is another tool again, and I think that the aim is to give people as many different choices as possible. and to have all those different choices showing the same information. So our system, Dynamis, that Stacey showed you, sends out its output, and that feeds into Google Maps. It feeds into Transit app, and it feeds into the live tracking on the Baybus website itself. So all of those outputs are showing the same information.
I think that's really great. I think that whenever you're trying to get information out to people, giving it out in as many forms as possible is the way to go. I'm really used to the digital signage, which is throughout Wellington at the moment. I see you've got it here in Tauranga. Are there plans to take it to Rotorua?
Yes.
Great.
No more questions. I'll move that we receive this report. Seconded by Councillor Thurston. Any discussion? There being none, all those in favour please say aye. Aye, against, carried. And we move in to one last report before food. Page 98. The performance report.
Okay, I have Jen Proctor here to present with me. We will take the report as read and be very, very brief, and unless there are any specific questions. So just a couple of points from me that I wanted to draw your attention to. The State Highway 2 corridor between Katikati and Tauranga was a particularly problematic area for us in terms of bus stops along that corridor, quite a dangerous route. So we actually had the residents at Fairview Estate approach us and suggest that a bus stop be included in the state. So we went ahead and set that up last year, and it's really been a fantastic solution. It's made for a much safer location for a bus stop, and it's had really good uptake from the residents. We had a total of 136 boardings in the first month and a half. But it was quite a unique situation where we put a bus stop on a private property, but yeah, definitely provided a solution to the issues that we were having out there. One of the other things I just wanted to note was for our total mobility scheme, we are currently, you may recall in our previous meeting, we were going through the procurement process for new operators. So we are currently adding operators to our Katikati network and Rotorua and Tauranga, which is really, really good outcome for our customers on the total mobility scheme. I'll hand over to Jen to make a couple of comments too.
Kia ora koutou. Just two items that I want to draw your attention to, and one is the mystery shopper and complaints. So we did experience quite a spike in complaints in the October-November period of 2020, along with reduced punctuality and reliability. That was quickly arrested, I think, with some focused contract management and also some recruitment. So NZ Bus in particular did quite a thorough recruitment drive. And the results have improved significantly since then. And the other item I wanted to draw your attention to was on page 115 of the Untitled Chapter report. And it's just to have a look at the usage of the B card use, and in particular with the tertiary class. We can see that it's a little bit more pronounced in Tauranga, where the portion of students using cash versus B card is requires some addressing. So we've had quite a number of activations, so O-Week events that have been taking place over the last few weeks, and we've had staff present at those activations, and they have been actively promoting the use of the B card, and also the tertiary commuter services that we run as well. So hopefully we can see a much better presentation of B card versus cash use for those tertiary services.
Councillor Brennan, have you finished?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Brennan.
Yes, can I ask, will we be moving to totally B card and no cash in the future?
It's a very big question. It's something that is being looked at nationally, and I think the preference you would find nationally is that we are moving towards B card, but there are a number of considerations that have to be taken into account because there is a portion of society that may not be able to use an online system, that are heavily reliant on cash, that might not be able to access credit cards, things like that. So there will probably always be a need for a cash solution, but as the national program are looking at the B card, we are considering how we can overcome those issues.
I would have thought my experience on a bus in Auckland that you weren't allowed on the bus unless you paid by B card.
And Mr. Chairman, can I say London Transport operates quite successfully on its Oyster system with no access to cash at all. It does cause a few problems for the visitors, but they've got around it and it works well. So that's the way ahead, and I think there's tremendous benefits in not having cash. Let's get on with it.
Yeah, can I say that it's surprising that the tertiary sector is the worst, the highest number of cash users. Those you would have thought would be a more modern, youthful and educated group that should be more aware than most of the benefits of the B card. So I'm just wondering how, is it just an education at the O week? How are you going to, we've had O week now, is it going to require follow-up? Because I think that needs to be resolved in that sector in particular.
We have talked to tertiary institutes about this, and interestingly, they said they do have quite a large demographic of students who pay for everything in cash, including their tuition, particularly overseas students. So that is something that is not just, isolated to the B card, but we definitely are working with the tertiary institutes to promote the B card. We've actually just had staff from the transport operation teams at the O Weeks over the past couple of weeks talking to students and really promoting the cards. And the tertiary institutes are really supportive of being an outlet for handing out cards so that the students aren't having to come to us to get them, so making it more convenient for them. So we'll continue to work with the tertiary institutes to increase the use of the B cards.
Thank you, Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Having elderly parents, I would just counsel us against being too aggressive to moving to a completely digital solution, because it's an accessibility issue for many people. And I know that for example, some people no longer can manage mobile phones, let alone internet. So and their banks are no longer servicing them. So expecting them to be able to move to a completely online card-based service is impractical, and it will shut them out of the service. So I just do think we need to balance that accessibility with the convenience.
Councillor. Mr. Thomas and then Commissioner Selwyn.
Thank you, and just on that cash versus B card thing as well, I think we always have to be aware of digital poverty in this day and age as well, and COVID-19 really showed us this in Rotorua. I live in a rural area. We had a really high percentage of families, school kids who could not access the internet, didn't have those digital connections. And we have families maybe at the lower end of the ladder who actually function on a cash basis because that's the only way they can manage their finances. So I think we always have to be aware that just because most of us are moving forward, not all of us can move at the same rate.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Thank you. Great report, and I actually think this is one of the most important agenda items that we have, because it enables us to see how we're doing and suggest hopefully ways that we might be able to lift some of the outcomes. The data presentation that we had before I thought was fantastic, and so thank you for that. And I think when we start to see that sophisticated data coming through in terms of our performance reporting here, then we'll really start to get some tangible understanding about what changes we can to increase patronage. So I'm looking forward to the day, Mr. Chairman, when the dashboard tells us, where we need to really focus because demand's going up, where we need to focus because demand's going down. We need to change our system and be adaptive to user demand. So well done, and look forward to seeing that day.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, in regards to tertiary students, yes, we might be tech savvy because a lot of them are my age, but the problem is we're so glued to our cars and so glued to jumping in the surf that we don't actually realise about the likes of the B card. So I think the key thing, and I say this a lot, is going to them and not just an O week, because O week they're all excited, they're ready to go to university, whereas you give it a month and a half, 2 months, it's a completely different story. That's when you've got their schedule sorted. So something like that, where you're actually going in and speaking to them once you've got their time management sorted, that's your perfect time to actually start talking about the likes of a B card. And the other thing would be to also potentially incentivise students getting onto the B card. Yes, it's $5 at the moment, but potentially lowering that for students would be something we should consider, because even $5 is a lot of money for a student, as some people in this room would know. So just considering that in some way, shape or form.
All right, we have a recommendation on page 98 to receive the report. Happy to move. Moved by Councillor Rose, seconded by Councillor Thurston. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. I think that concludes the meeting, unless anybody wants to have one last thought. Remember, lunch is there. Thank you, Cole, for standing in on for this meeting. I appreciate you being here, and thank you, Commissioner. No, not Worsley. But thank you for sitting on and listening in as well. Next time, please come and participate. We value your input. I think this is this is one of our big spends in our regional council, and it's got huge implications right across the region for the TLAs, but Tauranga City in particular. It's a big portion of it. So we look forward to continuing to improve our working relationship together. Thank you. And I declare the meeting closed at 1.